Chapter 8. The Clocktower Light. Morning rose softly over Waverly Bay after the night on the dune path, and Aiden woke with the calm weight of good memories lying kind across his chest, as if the fireflies had left a small lantern inside him that continued to glow even when the room was bright. He moved quietly so he would not disturb the hush that still lived in the early hour, brewed a cup of tea, and stood by the window while gentle light touched the small glass where the cutting floated. The root had forked again, two pale lines drifting like tiny streamers in clear water, and the sight made him smile. He lifted the sketchbook and opened to the page from the night before, where he had drawn a field of small lights and two open jars and the phrase "look, learn, return," and he felt steady as he traced the lines with his eyes. On the table lay the sanded board he had promised to bring to the greenhouse for the lantern project. He ran his hand along the grain and liked the way it felt smooth under his palm. The way wood carried a quiet warmth even when it had been taken from the tree for many years. In the pocket of his jacket was a folded card with a short message about the evening's plan. A card he would pin to the cafe board after breakfast so neighbors could know that something simple and kind would be made in their town tonight. The street outside was waking in a friendly way. A baker set a tray of cool air outside her door to let the room breathe after the first batch of rolls. A neighbor lifted a window and shook out a cloth with a brisk snap that sounded like a small flag greeting the day. A cat stretched on a wall and then looked around as if pleased to find everything exactly where it had been yesterday. Aiden slipped the board into a cloth bag, placed his pencil case and the sketchbook in his satchel, and walked to the cafe. The bell over the door chimed in that warm way that always made his shoulders relax. The owner was already at the counter with the kettle singing and a stack of clean cups ready, and she called hello in a voice that made every person feel like the only guest in the room. Aiden ordered chamomile with honey, then carried the steaming cup to the notice board. He pinned his card and looked at the words for a moment, not to check for mistakes, only to feel them settle in their place. It said lantern work begins at sunset in the greenhouse. Quiet visitors welcome to see the early design. Soft voices and patient hearts invited. And it had a tiny drawing of a square frame with a cobalt circle in the center. He stepped back and smiled when he noticed a child had left two white stones in the dish of sea glass, as if the sea wanted to trade materials with the land. He took a small seat beneath the fern, drank his tea, and sketched a few lines of the room that would not change even if the whole town changed outside. The candle halo on the table, the shelf with the tiny clothespins that held envelopes for slow letters, the curve of the fern like a green question mark that did not need an answer. Mira arrived a little later with a canvas bag over her shoulder and a loose braid that still held a few grains of sand from the dune path, because even the neatest person can carry the night in small ways. She waved to him, ordered a cup, and then met him by the board. Her eyes were bright, not the bright of too little sleep, but the bright of a person who had been given a quiet gift and knew how to accept it. She read the card and nodded and placed a pressed leaf under the pin. a small sign from the greenhouse that promised warmth and care. They did not talk much just then. The morning felt like a room where one moves gently among shelves. They agreed on the time to meet before sunset, and then Mira left for her errands with a light step while Aiden walked toward the pier to draw boats before the wind was up. The day turned warm and friendly, and he sketched in the shade of a piling while the harbor shifted in that slow way that makes a person feel balanced. He drew the rope lines and the slant of a mast and a gull perched on a cleat, and he wrote small notes by the sketches so that later he would remember the little shiver of light on the water and the cool smell of tar and salt near his shoes. Around noon he put away his book and went home to eat fruit and bread and write a few lines to an old friend about the peace he had found here. Not as a boast, only as a thank you to a person who had once told him to try the sea when the city had felt too sharp. He rested for a short hour and listened to a piano piece that moved like a walk down a familiar street. In the late afternoon he packed the board and the wire Mira had asked him to bring and made his way up the path to the greenhouse. The sun hung low and threw gentle light across the hill, and the glass panes glowed with a pale gold from within, the sort of glow that tells anyone who can see that good work is happening gently inside. He reached the door and found it open. Mira stood at the long table with the pouch of sea glass, and the white heart piece lay near her hand like a small moon. She smiled when he entered and touched the board with her fingertips, a welcome to the material that would soon hold their plan. They arranged the pieces on a cloth, not to fix anything yet, only to see what the glass wanted. The cobalt piece looked even deeper against the soft white and green, as if the morning at the shore had been pressed inside and would stay there no matter what the weather did. They measured wire lengths and checked the fit of small holes with the little hand drill, working slowly so that nothing would crack. As they began to hang the first few pieces from the frame with loose hooks to test the balance, the sky outside shifted from soft blue to a pink that made the glass blush. Then the light faded toward evening. Mira reached for the switch to turn on the lamp that always lit this stage of tasks, and the greenhouse did not answer. He paused and tried again. Aiden looked toward the town and saw that windows along the slope below were dim. The lighthouse continued to sweep the horizon with its steady blink, because it had its own power, but the houses and the lampposts were dark. The two of them stood still and listened. The air made no new sound, just the same night birds, the same low hush of the sea, the same creak of wood. They waited for the lamp to return. It did not. Mira said that the power sometimes stepped out for a short while when a summer line worked too hard, and that people here kept candles in drawers and matches in bowls for this very reason. Aiden nodded. He felt no worry, only a pleasant attention gather around the moment, the way a room listens when someone is about to play a simple song. Mira lit 2 candles in glass cups and set one near the board and the other near the frame. The flame found the glass pieces right away and gave them a life that was different from daylight. The white heart grew warm at its edge. The green curve looked like a leaf with late sun behind it. The cobalt seemed to ring even though it made no sound at all. Aiden said they could keep working slowly by this light, but Mira looked toward the town and then at him, and he understood before she said anything. Some parts of Waverly Bay were hard to walk in the dark for a traveler who did not know the way. The square had stairs that could trick a foot. The pier had lanes that narrowed near the water. The steep road where the old church stood curved tightly and had no rail. The old clock tower sat at the top of the square with a narrow stair that led to a small balcony around the face. People used to climb to the balcony in winter to hang lanterns when a storm brought ships in close. The lanterns helped the town stay calm. No one had done that in years because power had made such acts unnecessary. Mira and Aiden looked at each other and had the same thought in the same moment. She reached for her canvas bag and handed him another candle in a glass cup and said that if they could make the clock tower glow, the town would be a little safer and a little braver. Aiden agreed. He placed the board and wire in a drawer, covered the small pile of glass with a cloth so it would sleep, and helped Mira collect a few more candles and a matchbook and a coil of thin rope. They set out into the evening that now felt clear and honest without the hum of lights. The path down the hill was calm in the dark. The moon had not yet risen, so the world held a gentle gray that asked feet to be careful and hands to be ready to steady a friend. As they moved through the neighborhood, they saw people with candles in windows and small lights in doorways. Voices were low but cheerful. A child clapped at the shape of a flame on the ceiling like a tiny bird. An older man called to them from a doorstep and asked if the greenhouse needed anything. And when they told him their plan, he nodded and said he would place a lantern in his upstairs window to add to the glow. They reached the square and found the cafe open to the night with its door propped, the owner handing out tea poured by candlelight. The notice board shone kindly in the glow. Aiden pinned a quick card that said "Candles for the clock tower. We will try to make the path brighter." And Mira added a drawing of a star. People nearby heard the words and smiled and called good luck as the pair moved on. The steps to the clock tower were narrow and made of old stone that remembered many feet. At the base of the tower, a heavy door stood open because the air had warmed with the day and someone had thought to let the stairwell breathe. Aiden took the lead with a candle, and Mira followed with the bundle of candles held close so their glass cups would not clink loud. They climbed slowly so no flame would die. The stair curved in a way that made the world feel like it was turning even when one stood still. And every 20 steps there was a small square opening in the wall that gave a breath of outside air and a peek at the town from another angle. Through one opening they saw the harbor lying dark except for the patient sweep of the lighthouse. Through another they saw the square, which had become a gathering of little sparks held in many hands. Through another they saw the line of the dune path like a darker ribbon against the sand where the field of lights had danced last night. They reached the landing outside the clock face and stepped into air that had cooled. The face itself rose above them like a pale moon made by people, and the hands stood still because the power had gone. The balcony was a ring of stone with an iron rail, strong and simple. The town lay below like a quilt of soft squares stitched by lanes. The sea lay beyond like a quiet friend. Mira set the bundle down and opened it. Inside were candles of different heights and widths and a handful of small jars. She had gathered them for greenhouse walks and had not used them yet. Aiden tied the thin rope through the handles of the jar lids so they could hang them from the rail. They worked without rush and without many words, the way two people work who know that the task itself will teach them the order of things. He lit one candle and held his hand around it so the wind would not argue, then set it inside a jar and latched the lid and hung it on the rail. The jar swung once and then steadied and the light inside found its place. Mira lit a second and a third and a fourth, and soon the balcony wore a simple necklace of soft lights. Aiden emptied his pockets of the small white stones he had taken from the dish at the cafe in a moment of simple liking and placed them around the base of the jars on the stone so the glass would not knock with each move of air. Mira placed a cluster of candles without jars in a sheltered corner where a low wall cut the wind and the flame could rest without hurry. They paused and looked out. The effect was not grand. Did not need to be. It was enough. The square below picked up the glow and gave it back. People moved more confidently now. A pair of travelers who looked like they might have come in on the late bus stopped in the street, looked up at the circle of quiet fire, and then looked at a posted map and found their route with less worry. A boat near the pier sent one short note on its horn as if to say it had seen the kindness. A group of teenagers who had been laughing a little too loud because they were young and better than the dark for a while fell into a softer rhythm and began to sing instead. The owner of the cafe looked up from her doorway and lifted a cup toward the tower, a toast made of tea that meant more than it looked. Aiden and Mira stayed for a long minute without moving and let their breathing slow to match what they had made. He looked at her in the steady glow and felt the same sense he had felt under the fireflies, that peace can feel like a whisper shared between two people who have learned to take care. She looked back with an expression that mixed gratitude and quiet happiness and something he did not need to name. A small breeze moved through the openings in the stone and made the flames lean for a heartbeat and right themselves. Aiden thought of the evening when he had lost his sketchbook and how the town had given it back without judgment. And he thought of last night when tiny lights had taught them how to look. And he realized that tonight the same lesson had returned with a different costume. He said that the jar lights looked like fireflies that had chosen to stay still for once. And Mira laughed softly and said that the town would rest easier with a few tame stars at its center. They checked each candle again and trimmed 2 wicks with a small clipper so the flame would not smoke. They tied 1 extra jar to the rail and placed the last candle inside so the ring would look complete. Then they sat with their backs to the warm stone and watched. Down below, the small good things continued. A woman who ran a bed and breakfast guided 2 visitors toward her door with a hand light. A man who owned the bait shop shared a lamp with a neighbor whose cupboard had only matches and no candles. The bell in the church did not ring but caught the light from the square and held it gently near its rim. The clock hands above their heads were still, but time moved beautifully anyway. Aiden took out his sketchbook, and by the light of a jar he drew the town as it looked right then. Not in detail, only a softly glowing ring at the top and small points below. A path where the steps made a gray ribbon down, a dark shape where the dune began, the suggestion of a sea at the edge of the page. He wrote a line beneath the drawing that said, "When the power sleeps, people remember they can be lights." Mira watched the drawing appear and said quietly that she would like that exact sentence for the board in the morning. They stayed until they were certain the wind would stay gentle and that the jars would keep the flames safe. Then they stood and gathered the extra rope and the empty bag and began their slow walk down the staircase, stopping at each small square opening to look out and see that all was well. At the base of the tower they met two travelers who had climbed a short way and then hesitated. They were a young couple carrying backpacks and the nervous smiles of people who have walked a long distance and are unsure of the next turn. Mira asked where they were headed, and they named a small guest house near the North Pier. Aiden gave clear directions that even tired feet could follow, parting the route into simple steps, and then offered to walk them as far as the cafe so they could meet the owner who knew every bed in town. The couple accepted with relief. As they walked through the square, the candles above painted a soft circle on the paving stones, and the travelers sighed as if the ground itself felt friendly. At the cafe they were welcomed at once and given hot drinks and a note with instructions for a key kept in a reliable place. Aiden and Mira did not linger because they felt that tonight was a night for steady acts rather than long talk. They returned to the hill with their steps careful on the dark path, and in the greenhouse they checked the frame and the covered glass and felt the quiet of the room fold around them. The power had not returned, which made the greenhouse feel even more like a sanctuary. They lit two small candles and set them inside clear cups, then sat on the bench with steaming mugs that Mira made from water warmed on the little gas ring she kept for late work. The flame reflected in the pieces beneath the cloth so that little shapes of light moved like slow fish in a pond. They did not reach for the project now. They let it rest. Their talk was calm and simple. He told her about a story his grandmother had shared about a winter when the town where she had lived lost power for a week, and how people had placed jars with candles on their porches and had carried food from freezers to neighbors so nothing would be wasted, and how afterward she said everyone knew each other by the glow of their windows. Mira told him about a night during her studies when a city block had gone dark and how she and a roommate had walked the stairs to the roof and eaten fruit in silence and watched the sky become so thick with stars that it looked like a new ceiling, and how the moment had made her consider leaving and moving somewhere where she could look up and breathe more often. They let these stories sit between them like a pair of warm stones. After a while, the sound of footsteps outside told them that the neighborhood was winding down. They blew out the candles and locked the greenhouse with a gentle click. Outside, the town glowed more softly now as some candles had burned low and others had been pinched out by hands ready for sleep. The ring of light on the clock tower kept steady because the jars protected the flame. They walked down the hill, paused at the corner where they often paused, and looked back at the little constellation their hands had made. Aiden said that the town looked like the night sky turned upside down with small stars below and quiet dark above. Mira said that when people act together in a simple way, roofs learn to hold constellations. They smiled in the dark and did not try to improve the thought with anything larger. He told her thank you for understanding a moment before words and for having a drawer full of candles as if the evening had whispered in her ear hours earlier. She answered that he brought the same readiness in a different form, a habit of turning calm into clear action, and that it felt good to meet light with light. They said good night with the easy promise to meet in the morning to check the jars and gather the glass for the lantern again, then went their separate ways on streets that were quiet in the best way. In his room, Aiden set his satchel on the table and placed the sketchbook beside the cutting. He washed his cup in a shallow bowl because the tap did not run fast without power, and he dried it and set it upside down on a cloth. The piano could not play tonight, but he could hum the piece he liked, and he did so under his breath as he opened the window to the cool air. The sea spoke in its usual calm voice. Somewhere in the square a person laughed once and then closed a door with a soft hand. He stretched on the bed and pulled a light blanket over his legs and felt sleep arrive like a slow tide again. His last thought was of the ring of jars around the old clock face, their small flames holding steady against the wind, and of the travelers below finding their way as if guided by gentle stars, and of the warm truth that even without wires and switches the town